I'm GX94 Agriculture Director Doug Falconer. Joining me today is the CKRM AgriNews Director Ryan Young and the SaskAgToday.com Chief Agricultural Editor Kevin Hursh. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Doug.
Hey, Doug.
This is our first roundtable, and we've decided to kind of just shoot the breeze, talk about what's happened in agriculture over the past week. And first of all, we'll start with the forage rainfall insurance program. I believe that was announced on Tuesday after the long weekend. I know there was a lot of discussion about that. It sounds like a lot of people are going to be making claims and receiving money out of this. And Kevin, first of all, what's your take on what you've heard from that?
I think they've had a much more successful year. The rainfall forage insurance has sometimes been criticized because weather stations are too far apart or maybe not representative of what was received. But this year it seemed to work fairly well, maybe because it was more uniformly dry. I don't know. I know a neighbor of mine got his forage rainfall insurance some time ago. The official announcement of the $60 million+ was made early this week, and that's the most ever paid out. I still believe that they'll be well advised to keep working on satellite-based vegetative index kind of a insurance project or a product as they go forward. But for now, this is certainly the most successful year and the best support ever received on a forage rainfall insurance.
And Ryan, I know we'd heard, for instance, that perhaps more weather stations were needed. Is that what you heard as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of thinking about the Saskatchewan Cattlemen Association, they hosted a series of town hall meetings in areas where drought conditions have been affected the most, whether that be where Kevin is in Cabri, Cadillac, Kindersley, Central Butte, you name it. That was kind of the feedback that they were hearing across the board was more weather stations were needed. One of the main reasons being that it might not, there's not enough weather stations out there to kind of get a proper assessment of how much rainfall there was, among other things. So that was definitely one of the key pieces of feedback for the program.
Now, as for the forage rainfall insurance program, obviously it's still being tweaked, I would think. It sounds like it's been fairly successful since it began, but I think there's always room for improvement.
What I didn't hear was what level of enrollment, hearkening back to that drought meeting that Ryan mentioned in Cabri. My recollection of it was that only about 25% of the acres were covered. So maybe after a successful year with strong claims in a dry year that participation will continue. I think, of course, the cattle industry continues to wait and wonder whether the federal government is going to come up with its 60% share of agri-recovery. The province already announcing its $70 million will be paid out, $80 per head for breeding stock in the cattle industry. But the federal government still hasn't made an announcement on whether it's going to be cost sharing agri-recovery. And that's something we can watch for in the upcoming weeks.
Anything else to add?
Yeah, kind of going to the program and the provincial news release earlier this week, they said that, and they being the provincial government, saying about 90% of insured acres under the program received a payment, with about 80% or more coming from the southwest and west central areas of the province. So not a surprise there. And when I was talking with provincial agriculture minister David Merritt, he believes that that's partially due or mostly attributed to increased participation in the program. So those were kind of his main reasons for that.
All right, let's move on to our next subject then, the sheep industry and I guess the direction it's going. And I know, Kevin, this is something you brought up with us regarding sheep and how far along they've come in Saskatchewan recently, and maybe it's time for them to make a bit of a comeback.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I've long had an interest in the sheep industry. I can remember doing a half-hour TV documentary way back in the early 80s, wondering whether the sheep industry was going to flourish or just remain stable or die away in Saskatchewan. And had a chance meeting with Gord Schrader, Sask Sheep Development Board Executive Director. And then I think you were the one that interviewed him for your radio shows. And it's interesting to note that although not a lot of growth, but certainly more and more larger flocks, where it used to be a 500 ewe flock was a pretty big flock. Now there are some in the thousands, and there are some that are gone to intensive management using, for instance, old hog barns that aren't being used anymore, and doing a more intensive form of management. But a couple of the other takeaways I thought was really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it, but beef prices are amazingly high, record high. So that's reflected at the counter in the grocery store. Gord Schrader pointed out that sheep lamb typically is considered a kind of a luxury product because it's high priced, but it's now in many cases less expensive than beef is, which is interesting. Unfortunately, a lot of the lamb you'll see in grocery stores, such as at Costco, is imported lamb rather than Canadian lamb because we just don't produce enough to fill our domestic needs.
Anything else on that, Ryan?
I just kind of found it interesting that there's a sheep industry at all in Saskatchewan. You kind of associate the province with grain and cattle farming, but not a whole lot of sheep. So it was kind of a enlightening and kind of eye-opening story for me to hear about and also share with the audience.
Well, sounds like people were pulling the wool over your eyes then on that.
If somebody is, if I was a young person again with a young family that liked livestock and we were short of capital to get into other forms of agriculture, I can see why people might be interested in that instance in getting into the sheep industry if they're ambitious and hardworking and like livestock and don't have a whole bunch of money for capital investment. It's the type of agriculture you can get into with a little less cost than if you wanted to do a significant grain farm or even a beef farm.
All right. Well, our next topic that we wanted to discuss was grain and oilseed prices. And I know canola is huge here in this part of the province, and I'm sure pretty much in the Regina area as well, Ryan. Maybe not so much in the southwest corner, but I know there is canola there as well, Kevin. We've seen the price of wheat and canola tumble here over the last few days. In fact, maybe the last week or so. What do you see behind all of this?
Ryan, you go ahead.
Buying some time to think. Well, I was talking with AJ Tooley. He was, or excuse me, not AJ Tooley. I was talking with Austin Jameson. He was filling in for Adam Picallo today, doing the weekly grain market interview and how some of the canola and wheat futures were doing this past week. And he was talking about how both were on the downward trend. I know talking with Kevin the other day that canola futures were kind of on the downward trend and were tumbling. It's kind of interesting part of that, in listening to all these interviews, how the soybean prices, they kind of go hand in hand with canola. If one goes up, the other goes down, the other one follows suit. So that's one factor. When it comes to wheat prices, the first thing that comes to mind too is what's going on in Russia and Ukraine with the conflict there and the abundance or overabundance of Russian and Ukrainian wheat flooding into the market and not a whole lot of buyers lining up in droves to buy any. So the world market is kind of standing pat on hold, not really moving forward with buying any wheat. So it's kind of like a holding pattern, I would say.
I dropped a sample of canola off at the local terminal late last week and asked them the price, $17.75 a bushel. Geez, that's not too bad. Take a look at the sample and we'll make sure it's okay and might do some business at that. I think I'd be hard pressed now it would be just a little bit over $17 a bushel. So it's come down pretty hard. I know in this part of the world, people were expecting durum prices to continue shooting higher and higher because of drought reduced yields. And they did shoot higher, but have stalled out at $14.50, $15. The real winner in the whole equation right now is some of the pulse crops that red and large green lentils have continued to increase in price. Green peas are a good price. Chickpeas are a good price. So the pulses have continued to strengthen, and there's a lot of talk about the drought conditions in India. Their monsoon rainfall is shorter than normal. A lot of speculation about that, but there's certainly an uneven thing. It's not the whole tidal wave where all things are going up or all things are going down. Some are softening, like canola, wheat, and even feed barley is softened, whereas pulses have increased. And I did see some what I thought were very attractive bids just today on milling oats up in the 530, 550 a bushel range that I hadn't seen quite some time. Of course, that was a delivered price. So it's an uneven landscape out there right now, with some things going up and some things going down.
Well, I think it's a case where more than ever, boy, producers sure have to keep their eye on the markets because they've been volatile, they've been fluctuating a lot, and it's hard for them to pinpoint the exact spot to make the best dollar right now. I don't envy them at all.
They need to keep tuned to CKRM and CJEX and GX94 so they can get the latest information.
All right, and according to the latest information, Saskatchewan crop report suggests that 51% of the crop is in the bin. However, in Manitoba, our neighboring province, they're saying 37% in the bin. That's a fairly significant difference, almost 15%. What do you make of those numbers, Ryan?
I find it kind of interesting considering that in Manitoba, the 37% can likely be attributed to the fact that they've had a lot of rain there this season. And so, and hail as well. There has been some hail damage claims being made over the summer too. So, crop damage obviously due to hail, among other factors. So that might impede producer harvest progress. In Saskatchewan, it's a little more diverse. Like, in the Southwest and West Central, it's very dry. Whereas, say, in the East Central region of the province, there's been a little bit more rain, a little bit more moisture than usual. So there's a bit of fluctuation in progress. So that doesn't really surprise me about the difference in percentages.
I think if you were to take a look at the eastern side of Saskatchewan, and I haven't done this in the Sask crop report, but if you look at harvest progress on the east side of Saskatchewan, I don't think it would be too much different than over much of Manitoba. But the western side of Saskatchewan, not the northwest, because they've been pretty slow, but west central and southwest have pulled the harvest percentage much higher in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, for instance, Kevin, of course, you farm in that Cabri area. You're done, right?
Yeah, been done for more than a week now, and you'll see an occasional field here that still is out, but by and large, it's pretty few and far between. It's virtually complete here.
Yeah, my brother farms in Glentworth area, which is in that south central area, and he's been done for over a week as well. So, how about you, Ryan? I know you have some family that is involved in farming up in that Kelvington Margot area. How are things going there?
Things are progressing along nicely. I know a neighbor to the north of us has finished a barley crop and are just starting to work on canola.
Something else we wanted to talk about was a story that Ryan brought up earlier this week, or maybe it was late last week. It was regarding the biotech corn issue in Mexico. And of course, the United States is taking Mexico to the CUSMA panel over the perhaps preventing biotech corn from entering Mexico, and Canada has entered as a third party. Ryan, that was a story you worked on. What do you think's going on there?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story because to me, it just kind of came out of the blue all of a sudden. Mexico is deciding that, hey, we don't want any GMO corn coming into our country. And that was a presidential declaration. It wasn't really anything technically legislatively speaking. So the U.S., obviously taking issue with that because the U.S. is a large exporter of corn to Mexico. From last year's stats, they export roughly $22 billion worth of agricultural goods and $5 billion of corn alone last year. So obviously that would dig into their pockets, so to speak, with this ban should it, come into effect officially. And Canada, taking the same stance as the United States, although not really a huge exporter of corn, but, it could have, kind of a ripple effect on what's going to happen with canola or any other crop that we export to Mexico. So I would be interested in keeping tabs on this issue as well as it proceeds. I talked with Michael Harvey, the executive director of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, about this issue and to get his thoughts. And like the Canadian government, he's welcoming the federal government in opposing Mexico's ban simply because that they want to ensure that the rules of the free trade agreement, the current free trade agreement, are adhered to. And he was also talking about how, kind of lost my train of thought there. Sorry, but that was basically the main point I remember from Michael bringing it up during the interview.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting issue to follow, like Ryan says. It's my understanding, and this isn't always clear, but it's my understanding that Mexico has backed off a little bit from their very early threats to ban all corn, and it's now they're banning corn for human consumption for tortillas, but still allowing corn for livestock feed. So that makes it a little less of an issue, but it's still viewed as a thin edge of the wedge. If a country can unilaterally decide that genetically modified crops suddenly is not something they want to import, if they can do that with GM corn out of the U.S., why wouldn't they or couldn't they do that with GM canola out of Canada? And virtually all of the canola we grow is genetically modified. So even though Canada doesn't directly have a dog in this fight, indirectly we certainly do.
Great point. I think that kind of wraps up the week that was for us here at saskagtoday.com. Looking ahead to next week, was there anything that you're looking forward to in the next week, Kevin?
Going to follow grain prices with great interest. It's the time of year for that, where big moves are being made. We'll see if canola can recover. We'll see if some of the price strength on some of the other commodities continue. So that's certainly on top of my list to be watching.
And Ryan?
I'm going to continue to be out on the road next week as part of our 620 CKRM country cookout. So I'm going to be traveling out and about around the province, talking to farmers and how their harvest is going, crop conditions, how their yields are. I'm kind of interested to see how yields are moving forward, as well as the grain prices as well.
You bet. And of course, GX94 supper in the field. We're actually going to be entering week 5 already out of 8 next week. So it'll be interesting to see where that takes us as well. We've been kind of all over the place. We've been to Churchbridge and Insinger and Kamsack and Grenfell. So we've been bouncing around as well. And I know, Ryan, you were in, I think it was Wynyard and Wolseley last week. So you've been making some miles too.
That we have.
I think it's pretty safe to say that if the weather holds, I think it's supposed to now, at least for another week or so, 51% complete in Saskatchewan as of last crop report. We could see a pretty big jump come next crop report.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for listening to the saskagtoday.com roundtable. On behalf of our Chief Agricultural Editor, Kevin Hursh, and 620 CKRM AgriNews Director, Ryan Young, I'm GX94 Agriculture Director, Doug Falconer. Have a good day.